Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be scripting the Pet Enchanting system. Now, as always, if you guys do enjoy the video or it does help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on so you get notified every time I upload a brand new video. I also have Patreon. If you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game files that I made in this episode, there's a link down below the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, let's hop right into it. So, to get started with the scripting side of things, the first thing that we're going to actually do is go to my Patreon. There's going to be a link down below in the description, which will take you to this Patreon post right here, and this can be accessed and the file can be downloaded by anybody for completely free. This post contains a bunch of models that we're actually going to be using throughout the series, and for this episode, I just added the Pet Enchanting machine model to this post here. So to get it, we're just going to go ahead and click on assets.zip, which will allow us to download it to our computer. And now to add it into our Roblox studio, we're going to right click on the workspace, select insert from file, and then go inside of the assets folder and select the brand new enchanting table. Now once you select open, the model should be inserted inside of your workspace. We can hit F to actually focus on it, and now we can actually see it. First of all, let's hide these GUIs though, so let's set the UI visibility to false so that we don't actually see any of the UIs, and now we can easily move this model around in our workspace. Now I'm going to actually put this model on the forest island, so right up here. I'll also turn it a little bit and maybe even reposition a tiny bit as well, and I think that looks pretty good. Now the last thing I'm going to do with this model is actually put it inside of the specific folder, so inside of the forest folder right here, and now that model has been added to our game. We can then go back to the view tab and turn on the UI visibility right there, and now we can see our UIs once again. Now to begin scripting, let's actually go ahead and update our pets config, which is inside of the replicated storage inside of the configs folder right here. Now that we have this module script open, the first thing we want to do is update the pet instance type. We actually want to add a new property to this, which is going to be called Enchantment, which is going to be a table. Now this table is actually going to have two properties. The first property is going to be called Enchantment, which is going to be a string, and the second property is going to be level, which is actually going to be a number. Now the reason that we're updating the pet instance type is because pet instances should now hold whatever enchantment that they actually have on them, as well as the level of the enchantment. We of course need to add this because every single pet is going to be able to have their own enchantment, and that enchantment is also going to have a level. Just to make things a little bit more clear to you, you don't need to have this enchantment property, which is equal to a table. You could make one property called enchantment, which is going to be a string, and then another property called enchantment level, which would be the number. Then you don't have to store that data inside of a table. But personally, I think the table makes a little bit more sense, so that's why I'm going to do it this way. You can do it however you want to, but remember, when it comes to indexing and following along with me, you might need to make some changes to account for that as well. With that being said, we're good with the pet instance. The next thing we'll do is create a variable inside of this module called Enchantments. Now this table is just going to be an array of strings, and each of those strings are going to be a name for each of the enchantments in our game. So for instance, I'm going to have an enchantment in our game called Clicks. I'm also going to have one called Rare Luck, Epic Luck, and finally, Legendary Luck. So those are all four of the enchantments that we're going to have in our game. Next, we'll create a variable of the pet's config called Enchantment Chances. Now this is going to contain each of the enchantments, and we're going to set each of the enchantments equal to a number, which is going to specify the chance of this enchantment being picked when enchanting a pet. So for the Clicks enchantment, this is going to have a 30% chance. For the Rare Luck enchantment, this is also going to have a 30% chance. And now I'm going to copy and paste this 2 times to make this a little bit easier. Then we'll change that to Epic and that one to Legendary. And for the Legendary Luck, I want this enchantment to have a 10% chance of actually being selected compared to all the other ones which have a 30% chance. Now we can add another variable onto here called Enchantment Color, which is once again going to be equal to a table. And then we're just going to copy and paste the Enchantment Chances table inside of here, because once again, we want to set a value for each of the specific enchantments, but instead of setting it as a number, this time we actually want to set the value to be a color 3. Now this color is going to be used as the background color for when displaying this enchantment in a GUI, and each enchantment having its own unique color displayed in the GUI makes it look a little bit cooler as well, so that's why we're going to do that here. Now I'm going to say color3.from RGB, and the Clicks enchantment color is going to be red. We can then copy and paste this for the Rare Luck, and now the Rare Luck will have a pink color. We can then do the same for the Epic and the Legendary Luck. For the Epic Luck, that'll be a darker blue, and for the Legendary Luck, we'll go with a light blue, just like that. We'll then create a variable called Max Enchantment Level, and we're going to set that to 6, because enchantments in our game are going to be able to go all the way up to level 6. We'll then create another variable. This one is going to be called Enchantment Level Chances, which is once again going to be set to a table. Now inside of this table, we want to list each level with a number representing the chance that this level can actually be selected. So for instance, level 1 has a 40% chance of being selected, whereas level 2 only has a 30% chance. Now level 3 will have a 22% chance, level 4 will have a 5% chance, level 6 will have a 2.8% chance, and level 6 will have a 0.2% chance. Now we've added pretty much all the necessary variables to the module, but let's go ahead and actually create a function as well. This function is going to be called getEnchantingCost, which is going to accept a pet, which is a pet instance, as well as a player's data. Now we're going to create a variable called price, which is just going to be set to 1000. Now how we're going to price an enchantment is if the pet is upgraded at all, then that's going to increase the price. Otherwise, if the pet has not been upgraded at all, then the player is just going to have to pay 1000 gems. There are so many different ways that you could choose to calculate this price. If you want to calculate it based off rarity and upgrades and other things, you certainly can include and do that math inside of here, but we're just going to base it off upgrades. So we're going to create a variable called current upgrade, which of course is going to be equal to pets.getCurrentUpgrade, and we're going to pass through the pet. Now, if the current upgrade equals rainbow, then we're going to add 1 million to the price. Otherwise, if the pet is golden, then we're going to add 500,000 to the price. Otherwise, if the pet is shiny, then we'll only add 100,000 to the price. And then after we've done all that math, we will then go ahead and return the price variable. Now, like I said, the only way that the price is going to be increased is based off the pet's upgrade. You can certainly do this math a different way if you'd like to. Now, we're mostly finished with updating the config, but the next thing that we'll do is add a brand new remote event. So we're going to go inside of the pets folder and we'll throw in a brand new remote event. And we're going to rename this remote event to Enchant Pet. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and actually update the state. So going inside the replicated storage, inside of the client folder, we have the state module script right here. Inside of here, we're going to go down all the way towards the bottom, and let's look for our claim rainbow pet remote event right here. We'll go ahead, copy and paste that, and now we'll add the enchant pet remote event here. Now for the arguments that this remote event is going to receive, we're going to get the UUID, a pet that has been enchanted, as well as the enchantment, which is going to be a string, and the enchantment level, which is going to be a number. Now how we're going to update the pet data is by going inside of the pets data, which is the player's pet inventory, and inside of here we want to look for the specific pet. Then we want to set the enchantment table to a brand new table with the property of enchantment set to the specific enchantment, and then the level property set to the specific level. And now that we've done that, whenever the pet is enchanted, the state on the client will be updated correctly. Now that we've done that, we can begin actually scripting the GUI. So we're going to go inside of the starter player, inside of the starter player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, and duplicate pet bank script. We'll then rename this to Pet Enchanting, and then open that up. Now inside of here, we're going to delete all the functions except for setup models, and then we're going to delete everything below there as well. Next, we'll start updating the variables towards the top. So we also want to get the tween service inside of here as well. We then add the state manager, the pet utils. We don't need the pet bank config, but we do actually need pets config. So let's go ahead and grab that. On top of that, we're going to need the viewport model module. So we got that. And then we're also going to need the format number.simple module as well. So now we've got all those modules. We then have the remotes variable, the player GUI. For the GUI, we of course want to get the pet enchanting GUI. We then have our frame variable. Let's then create a variable called confirmation frame, and that's going to be equal to GUI.confirmation. Now I'm then going to delete pretty much all of these variables in between the function and the confirmation frame variable. We'll then create a variable called pet viewport frame, which is going to be equal to frame.pet. We then have the chances frame, which is equal to frame.chances. We can then get the enchantment frame and then the level frame. And then we'll also get the pet container as well, which is inside of the holder frame dot container. So just like that. And then we'll rename this to pet container. After that, we have the chance button, which is going to be equal to frame.chance. We then also have the enchant button. And then finally, we have the exit button as well. And there we go. We've got pretty much all of the standout elements from the GUI. Now let's create two more variables. The first variable is going to be called selected enchantments, and that's going to be equal to a blank table. And then we'll also create a variable called selected pet, which is going to be of the pet instance type, but it's also going to be optional. So that's why we're going to add a question mark here as well. Now the selected enchantments variable, we're going to use that in just a little bit when we're scripting the auto enchant side of things. So that's why we're creating this right now. And then we'll also be using selected pet to set whatever pet the player selects so that we know whenever we click that enchant button and want to fire that off to the server. Anyways, below this, we have the setup models function, and I just kept this around because we pretty much have been recreating this function every single time. Now the only change that we really want to make here is the name. Instead of looking for pet bank, we actually want to look for enchanting table, which is the name of the model that we inserted into our game earlier. And now whenever a player touches this, if it is our specific player, then we're going to enable the GUI. So that's all looking great. But to add on to this, we're going to create a brand new function called display GUI, which is not going to have any arguments. And what we're going to do for right now is just set the enable property of the GUI to true. And now going back to setup models, we'll actually call display GUI right here. Now, in addition to where we're checking if the player equals our specific local player, we also want to make sure that the GUI is not already enabled. Otherwise, we're just going to constantly be reopening the GUI for the player and probably regenerating things unnecessarily. Cool. So now that we have the setup models function all completed, let's then go ahead and call the function at the bottom of our script. Now, somehow I still managed to forget one variable. So before we're actually able to do the next thing, let's create a variable up here called auto frame, which is going to be equal to frame.auto. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is start generating all of the enchantment buttons inside of the auto frame. So we're going to say local function generate auto. And now what we're going to do is loop through each of the enchantments inside of the pets config. So pets config.enchantments. And in addition to looping through each of the enchantments, we also need to make a button for each level of every enchantment as well. So inside of this for loop, we're going to create another for loop. So we're going to say for level equals 1. And then to set the amount of times that we actually want to loop, we're going to set this to the max enchantment level. And then we're going to increase by 1 each time. Then what we'll do is inside of the auto frame, there's the container, and inside of there is the template, and we want to clone that. Now that we're cloning that, let's let's then make sure that we actually parent that. So we want to parent that to the container inside of the auto frame. We're then going to make this visible. Now we then want to set the name of it. But before we do that, we're going to actually create another function called get enchantment string, which is going to accept an enchantment, which is going to be a string, and a level, which is going to be a number. Now this function is going to be super simple. All we're going to do is return a string, which is actually going to have the enchantment and then a space and then the number. So that's all that this function is going to actually do. It's just going to return a string that does this specifically, but we're going to be using that in a couple of different locations. That's why I wanted to make a function to do this exactly. So now that we've created that function, we can go back to generate auto, and we're now going to set the name to get enchantment string with the enchantment as well as the level. Now that we've set the name, let's then go ahead and update that enchantment text label, and we're going to set that to the enchantment string as well, but to make it even simpler, we're just going to set it to the clone.name, which we just set. Awesome. Now we've updated pretty much everything that we need to update on that. The next thing that we're going to do is actually listen for the button to be clicked. Now if the button is clicked, then we want to do something, and let's actually go ahead and create another function for doing this specifically. So this function is going to be called select enchantment, and it's going to take an enchantment, which is going to be a string, as well as a level, which is of course going to be a number. Now like I said, when the button is clicked, we're going to want to call that. So let's go ahead and pass through the enchantment as well as the level. Now the first thing that we want to do inside this function is actually get the enchantment string. So we're going to say local enchantment string is equal to get enchantment string, and we're going to pass through the enchantment as well as the level. Now that we've gotten that string, let's go ahead and actually see if this enchantment is already selected. So we'll say table.find, and we're going to look through the selected enchantments table and try to find the enchantment string inside of that table. We're then going to go ahead and find the button, which is going to be inside of the autoFrame.container. So we're going to call find first child on that and pass through the enchantment string. Now that we've gotten that button, we're then going to check if the button is actually selected. And if it is selected, then we want to deselect it. So let's go ahead and remove that from the selected enchantments table. So we're going to remove is selected, because remember, table.find actually just returns a number. So is selected is a number, and table.remove needs the index of the object that we want to remove. So that's why we're passing through is selected to table.remove. And then after that, we then also want to update the background color 3 of the button. So now if the button's not selected, then we just want to set it to a basic yellow color. But otherwise, if the button is not already selected, then we do want to select the button. So we're going to insert that enchantment string inside of there. And then once again, we're going to update the button's background color. This time we'll set it to a green because it's been selected. And that's all that we're going to do with the select enchantment function. And we're calling it here already, so that's all good to go. So now that we're done with the generate auto function, let's go ahead and actually call it below the setup models function, just like that. Now that we've handled the auto frame, let's go and handle the chances frame, which is going to display all of the enchantments as well as all of the levels and what chance each of them have to be selected when enchanting a pet. So below generate auto and above display GUI, we're going to create a brand new function, which is going to be called generate chances. Now again, we're going to loop through all of the enchantments inside of the pets config.enchantments. This time for a clone though, we want to actually go inside of the chances frame, inside of the enchantments frame, and then we want to look for the template and we're going to clone that. Let's then set the parent of that, and that's of course going to be inside of the chances frame and back to the enchantments frame. We'll then set the visibility of that to true. We'll then set the name of that to the specific enchantment. After that, we want to update the enchantment text label, and now we just want to set it to the specific enchantment name. But I want to do something special because all the enchantments are named stuff like clicks or rare luck, legendary luck, and epic luck. I don't want to display luck. I just want to display rare, epic, and legendary. So I'm going to say string.gsub, and we want to use the enchantment string, but we want to replace a space and luck. So if there's a space and then the word luck inside of that enchantment string, we're just going to replace that with a blank string. So that'll make the string like epic luck just say epic. And for something like coins, that's not going to modify the string at all because there is no space luck inside of that string. Now that we've updated that text label, let's also update the chance text label as well. And we're just going to set that to pets config.enchantment chances. And then we're going to index that with the specific enchantment. And then going back to the string, we want to put a % right here as well after we display the number. Cool. So that generates all the enchantments. And now we want to generate all the levels. So similar to how we did this for loop up here, we can actually just literally copy and paste it. Now, honestly, we can just copy the first 4 lines right here. So instead of going inside of the enchantments, inside of the chance frame, we actually want to go inside of the levels, inside of the chance frame. Then we want to parent that to that same frame. We'll still set it to visible, but this time we want to set the name to level. Then inside of the clone, we have a level text label, and we're going to set the text of that equal to the level. And now we can pretty much just copy and paste this chance line, but instead of indexing the enchantment chances, we want to actually index the enchantment level chances. And we want to index that with the specific level. Cool, so now that generates everything inside of the chances frame. We can then go ahead and actually call that function, so generate chances. Next, what we can begin doing is start generating all the pets inside of their container. Now, before we create the generating pets function, we're actually going to create a function that we always create, which is going to be called clean container. And as usual, all we want to do is loop through all the children inside of the pet container. And now if the child is a text button and the child is visible, then we want to destroy that child. And now that we've created that function, we can actually go ahead and create our generate pets function. So generate pets. And the first thing that we'll do is clean the container. Now, after we've cleaned the container, let's then go ahead and loop through all the pets. So .getData.pets. We'll then create a variable called clone. boom. That's of course equal to pet utils.generate pet. We're going to pass through the pet container.template as well as the pet container, and finally the pet instance. The last thing we want to do is listen for it to be clicked on, and whenever it's clicked on, we want to call a function, but let's go ahead and create that function, which is going to be called select pet. And of course, the argument is going to be the pet instance, just like that. So like I said, whenever we click on this, let's go ahead and actually call that function and pass through the pet instance, just like that. Now inside of the select pet function, what we want to do is first generate our pet viewport frame. But before we generate it, we also need to clean it, similar to how we clean the container. So we're going to say viewport model.clean viewport, and we want to clean the pet viewport frame. After that, we then want to get the model. So we're going to say petsconfig.get model, and we're going to pass through the pet instance. Now once we get that model, we can then generate the viewport frame. So we're going to pass through the pet viewport frame as well as the model, and then our usual cframe.angles 0, math.rad, -90, -90, and 0 once again. And then finally, we're going to set the selected pet variable equal to the pet instance, just like that. So this function is going to display the pet inside of the viewport frame as they should be whenever we select the pet to be enchanted. And now that we've done this, we also want to update the display GUI function, because every single time we open this GUI, we want to actually clean our pet viewport frame and basically remove the pet from there. And since we're removing the select pet from that frame, we also want to set selected pet equal to nil, because there is no longer a selected pet. And then finally, we want to call generate pets as well to repopulate the GUI with all the pets the player currently has. The next thing we can begin doing is actually start scripting most of the buttons of our GUI. So for instance, our first button is going to be the enchant button. And whenever we click that, of course, we want to connect that to an anonymous function. Now this button is going to actually be a little bit more than you're expecting. When we click the enchant button, the first thing that we want to do is make sure that there is a selected pet. And if there's not a selected pet, then we don't want to do anything else. We then want to get the cost of enchanting that specific pet. So petsconfig.get enchanting cost, and we're going to pass through the pet as well as the state manager.get data. We'll then create a variable called can afford, and that's going to be equal to the state manager.get data.gems is greater than or equal to the cost. And if we're not able to afford it, then we also want to stop the function right there. Oh, and for get enchanting cost, you're supposed to pass through the selected pet. Now, if we are able to afford it though, we then want to make the confirmation frame visible so that the player can click on either yes or no if they want to enchant the pet. So we have the confirmation frame, and we want to make sure that that is visible. So we're going to set that to true. But then also inside of the confirmation frame, we have a title, and we want to set the text of that title. Now, what we want to set the string to is enchant, and then we want to display the selected pet's name. So enchant, then the pet's name for, and then we want to call format number.formatCompact on the cost, and then we want to say gems with a question mark. So enchant dog pet for 999 million gems, question mark. So we're updating the confirmation frame and then displaying that to the player. Then inside of the confirmation frame, we have the buttons frame, and inside of here, we can listen for the yes text button to be clicked. Now, if there's not a selected pet, then we don't want to do anything. So we're going to stop the function right there. There should always be a selected pet if the player is able to click the yes button, but we're still just going to include that just to be safe. And then after we click yes, we then want to fire that enchant pet remote event to the server. And all we're going to do is pass through the selected pet's UUID. And finally, we're going to set the confirmation frame to no longer be visible. Now that's great. Let's then go ahead and actually copy and paste this. And this time we want to do this for the no text button. And all we want to do if we click no is just set the confirmation frame to no longer be visible. Now the enchant button is actually slightly more complex than that. If we've selected any of the enchantments in our auto enchant frame, then we want to actually continuously enchant the pet over and over again. So what we're going to do is above display GUI, we're going to create another function called update enchant button. And now we're going to have an argument called default, and that's going to be a boolean. And what default means is, do we want to set it to what it is by default? And default would mean that the button displays just enchant. So when we call this function, what we want to do is update the title text label of the enchant button. And now if the default argument is true, then we want to set this to enchant in all capital letters. Otherwise, we want to set this to cancel auto. In addition to that, we also want to set the background color 3 of the text button. And if default is true, then we're going to set it to a nice pinkish color. Otherwise, we'll set it to a red color. And along with updating those colors, let's also update the UI stroke color as well. Now, if default, and then we're going to set it to a darker pink. Otherwise, we'll set it to a darker red. Now that we've created that function, we're going to create another function, which is going to be called cancel auto. Now, inside of this function, we're going to actually loop through all of the enchantment strings inside of the selected enchantments table. First, we're going to go ahead and get the button from inside of the auto frames container. So find first child, and then we'll look for that enchantment string. Then once we find the button, we're going to update the background color 3 of that to the original yellow. So let's go ahead and copy and paste that right there. And then we're also going to remove that index from the selected enchantments table. Now, finally, after we've removed all the selected enchantments, what we'll then do is call update the enchant button, and we're going to pass through true. because we've just canceled the auto mode. Now going back to the display GUI function, we also want to call update enchant button inside of here, and we want to pass through true as well because we want to reset it to what it looked like by default. Now going back to when we actually click on the enchant button, the first thing that we want to do even before we check if there is a pet selected is we actually want to check the text of the title text label on the enchant button, and if that equals cancel auto. Now if the text of that is set to cancel auto, then we do want to actually call the cancel auto function, and then we want to stop the function right there. So basically, if the player is auto enchanting, then we're just going to cancel the automatic enchanting right there. Otherwise, it's going to do what it normally should do and pop up the confirmation screen, and then we're going to actually enchant it once we click on yes. Now we've pretty much got every single button scripted except for about 2. So we actually have that chance button. Now whenever this is clicked, all we want to do is update the visibility of the chances frame to just be the opposite of whatever it currently is. On top of that, we need to script the exit button as well. And all we're going to do is set the enabled property of the GUI to false. Now next what we'll begin scripting is the animation side of things. Below our get chances function, we're going to create another function called generate animations. Then inside of here, we're going to create a variable called loop, and that's going to be equal to 7. Then we're going to use a while loop, and we're going to say while loop is greater than 0, do. Next, what we're going to do is loop through all the enchantments. So we're going to say for index, comma, enchantment in petsconfig.enchantments do. Then what we're going to do is clone the template inside of the enchantment frames container. So template, and then we're going to clone that. We're of course then going to parent that back to the enchantment frame.container. We then want to make sure that we set that to be visible. And for the name, it's of course going to be the enchantment. Then we also want to update the title text label inside of here and set that equal to the enchantment. And then we're going to set the background color of this as well to the petsconfig.enchantment color and index that with the specific enchantment. Cool. So that'll handle all the templates inside of the enchantment frame. And then we need to do the same for the level frame as well. But we only want to do the same for the level frame if the loop is greater than 3. So for the levels, we want to do it a little bit less than we do for the enchantments. And the reason for that is because the amount of levels there are is a whole lot more than the amount of enchantments that there are. And although this may be confusing as to what we're even doing right now, I'll be able to better explain it once we get down to scripting the actual animation side of things. So once again, we're going to loop through all the levels. So for level equals 1, comma, petsconfig.max enchantment level, comma 1, do. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did above, but for the level frame. So level frame.container.template, we're going to clone that. We'll then parent that back to the level frame.container. We'll then set that to be visible. We'll then set the name of that to the level. We'll then set the text of the title text label to the level as well. And that's all that we're going to do for here. And we're not even going to change the background color. Now finally, after we've done all that, at the very bottom of the loop, the final thing that we need to make sure, and probably the most important thing when using a for loop, is that we actually decrease the loop variable. So we're going to say loop minus equals 1 so that we subtract 1 from the loop variable every single time the loop goes through. Now that we've created that function, let's then go ahead and call it, and we're going to call it below our generate chances. So generate animations just like that. Now we can go ahead and create the animation function. So right above the display GUI function, I'm going to create a new function called Animate. And this is going to accept an enchantment, which is going to be a string, as well as a level, which is of course going to be a number. Now the first thing that we're going to do inside of this function is create a variable called original enchantment position, which is going to be equal to the enchantment frame.container.position. And then we also want to do the same thing, but for the level frame this time. So we're going to say original level position, and then we want to look through the level frame inside of the container and get that position. So how this animation is going to work is we're first saving the starting position, and then we're going to use the tween service to basically move the position of this frame downwards to create the animation of all the different enchantments that the player has available to them, as well as displaying all the levels as well. And then when the animation is finished, we're finally going to display what enchantment and what level of the enchantment the player actually got for enchanting their pet. So now that we've saved the original positions, the next thing that we need to do is calculate the enchantment end position. And how we're going to calculate that is by saying hashtag enchantment frame.container and then get children. So the amount of children that are inside of the container divided by 2. And then we're going to subtract 1 from that, and that's going to give us the end position for the enchantment container. We'll then do the same thing for the level position. So level frame.container, get the children, divide that number by 2, and then subtract 1 from that total. And then we want to rename this variable as well to be level end position. Then we'll create a variable called tweenInfo, which is going to be equal to tweenInfo.new. We want both these animations to take 2 seconds each. We'll use the linear easing style, and then we'll use out for the easing direction. Now let's go ahead and create the enchantment tween. So we're going to say tween service semicolon create. We want to pass through the enchantment frame.container as well as the tweenInfo, and the property that we want to update is the position, and we're going to set that equal to udim.to from scale 0 and then minus enchantment end position. So this tween will constantly be moving the frame down, and that'll create that animation of sort of displaying all the levels and all the enchantments to the player. Now that we've created the enchantment tween, we also need to create the level tween as well. So for this, we want to pass through the level frame frame.container, the tween info, and then we also want to pass through the level end position for here as well. Cool, so now that we've made both those tweens, let's sort of update both the level and the enchantment frame. So we're going to go inside of the level frame, and we want to get the frame called level inside of there, and we want to set the visibility of that to false. And then we also want to do the same thing for the enchantment frame as well. So enchantment frame, get the enchantment, and then set the visibility of that to false as well. Now that we've done that, we want to display the animation. So inside of the enchantment frame, we have the container, and we want to set the visibility of that to true, and then we're going to go ahead and play our enchantment tween. Cool, so now that we're playing it, let's say enchantment tween dot completed. So whenever this tween finishes, we then want to do something. And when the enchantment tween finishes, what we want to do is we want to actually reset the position of the container back to the original enchantment position. Let's then get the enchantment color, which is equal to pets config dot enchantment color, and index that with the specific enchantment. Then inside of the enchantment frame, we have the enchantment frame, and we're going to set the text of the title text label to the enchantment. Of the enchantment frame, we also want to update the background color as well to the enchantment color. And now that we've updated both of those, we then want to make sure that this is visible, so we're going to set that to true. And then we also want to make the container no longer visible as well, so we're going to set that to false. But we're actually just going to copy and paste that up there, and that makes our code a lot more organized. So now that the enchantment animation is finished, we then want to start the level animation. So inside of the level frame, we have the container, and we want to make that visible, and then we want to play the level tween. So let's go ahead and play it. Cool, and now that we're playing it, we then want to listen for it to be completed, so dot completed. Now we want to do a lot of the same things that we did for the enchantment tween. So inside of the level frame, we have the container, and we want to reset its position to the original level position. After that, inside of the level frame, we have the level frame. We want to update the text of the title text label inside of there to the level. And then we also want to make this visible as well, so we're going to set that to true. And then we also want to set the container to no longer be visible, so we're going to set that to false. And I'm just going to once again copy and paste this up here to keep it organized, and that's looking great. So once the level tween is finished, we're not going to do anything, and that means that the animation is fully finished, and now when enchantment the player received is being displayed to them. Now we haven't actually called this function, but where do we want to call that function? Well, we want to listen to the enchant pet remote event. So dot on client event connect and an anonymous function inside of here, which is going to accept the UUID of the pet as well as the enchantment and the level. So now once all that information is given to us, we're going to call the animate function and pass through the enchantment as well as the level. Now that we finished the animation, we also have to script in the auto enchanting aspect of the system as well. So inside of this remote event, after we start the animation, what we then want to do is also see if we should automatically start enchanting the pets. So if hashtag selected enchantment is greater than 0, then that means that there are enchantments selected and we should automatically be enchanting this pet. So now that we know that we want to start auto enchanting, we're going to call the update enchant button function and pass through false because we want the button to display cancel auto to notify the player that we're automatically enchanting their pet. We then want to see if we should actually cancel auto enchanting as well because we received one of the enchantments that are selected. So we're going to create a variable called isSelected, which is going to be equal to table.find, and we want to look through the selected enchantments table for the get enchantment string and pass through the enchantment as well as the level. Now what we're then going to do is actually use task.delay because we want to wait 5 seconds as that's how long our animation is going to take. And then after 5 seconds, we're going to check if the enchantment is selected. And if it is, then we're going to call update enchant button and pass through true because we're no longer going to auto enchant the pet. Now, if the enchantment that we received was not one of the selected enchantments, then we want to make sure that there is still a selected pet. And if there is still a selected pet, then we also want to make sure that the UUID is the same as the selected pet's UUID. And we also want to make sure that the GUI is enabled as well. And if all of these are true, then we're going to call update enchant button, pass through false, and then we also want to fire the enchant pet remote event again. So fire server, and we're going to pass through the selected pet's UUID. So that's how our auto enchanting system is going to work. If the player has any enchantment selected, then the client will continuously request for the server to enchant the pet every 5 seconds until they receive one of the selected enchantments. And with that being scripted, we're pretty much done on the client side, and now we can start working on the server side. To begin scripting this on the server side, we're of course going to go inside of the server script service and open up the pet's module script. Inside of here, we actually want to go to the create pet function because we need to update this. Now, in order to fix all these red underlines, what we need to do is add the enchantment property to this, and that's going to be set to a table. And now inside of this table, we're going to say enchantment, and all we're going to do is set that to nil, and we're going to do the same for the level as well. And once we do that, that'll clear up all of the red underlines because now the table that we're returning is actually the same type as the pet instance, and we're no longer missing the enchantment property. Next, what we'll do is actually script the enchantment functionality. So going back to the top of the script, we're going to add a variable up here called player cooldowns, which is going to be equal to a blank table. And then below this, we're going to say math.randomSeed, and then we're going to call tick inside of here. Now, the reason that we need to have math.randomSeed is because when we use the math.random function, at least in Studio, math.random can be the exact same every single time that you start and test your game. Seriously, test this out. When we finish this video and we're using math.random, all you have to do is just remove this from the script with math.random being used inside of it, and then you can easily tell that sometimes math.random might give you the same exact number every single time. So that's why we're saying math.randomSeed right here and passing through tick, because that'll give us a completely random number every single time exactly as it should. Anyway, now that we've added both of those to our scripts, we're going to go down towards the bottom, and right above where we start connecting all the remote events, we're going to create a new function right here called choose enchantment, and this is going to have an argument called enchantment, which is going to be a boolean. Now we're going to use this function to choose either a random enchantment or a random level from our list of enchantments and levels. So we're going to create a variable called pool, and how we're going to set that is based off if enchantment is true. Now if enchantment is set to true, then we want to go inside of the pets config and use the enchantment chances table. Otherwise, we want to use the enchantment level chances table inside of the pets config. Now the reason that this variable is called pool is because I would like to call it table, as that's what we're actually setting these variables to, but as you can see, the word table appears in light blue because table is a keyword in Roblox that you shouldn't really be using, and the only other synonym that I could think for table is pool. I don't know, for non-native English speakers that might be really odd, and for some people that might be really odd. You can name this variable whatever you want to. That's why I named it pool though, so don't get too confused about it. Then we'll create a variable called total weight, which is going to be set to 0. After that, we're going to loop through the pool table, and then for the total weight, we're going to add the chance to it. Then after we calculate the total weight, we'll then create a variable called random weight, which is going to be equal to math.random, and it's going to have to be a number between 1 and the total weight. Then we're going to create a variable called count, which is going to be set to 0, and then we once again want to loop through the pool, so we're going to say for enchantment, comma chance in pool do. Now remember, this might not always be an enchantment. It can be either an enchantment or a level, but we can only name it either one, so that's why I'm just going to name it enchantment, and it doesn't really matter. You probably won't be messing with this function too much anyway. Now inside of here, we want to add chance to the count variable, just like that, and then we're going to check if the random weight is less than or equal to count, and if it is, then we're going to return the enchantment. Another thing that I just realized is that we actually have two different variables named the exact same way, so what we should do, just to clear up any confusion, is name this enchant, and then we want to return enchant, just like that. So that function is going to generate our enchantment and our level, taking into account each of their chances, and then we actually have to create a function for enchanting the pet. So we're going to create a function called enchant pet, which is going to accept the player, as well as a UUID, which is going to be a string. Now, of course, inside of this function, we want to get the player's profile, so player data, index that with the specific player. If there is no profile, then we're going to stop the function right there. We then want to find the pet, so we're going to say profile.data.pets and index that with the specific UUID. If we're not able to find that pet, then we will also want to stop the function right there and do nothing. We then want to check if the player is on cooldown. So if table.find player cooldowns, and we want to look for that specific player, and if we are able to find them, then we want to stop the function right there as well. After that, we'll then get the price of the pet. So inside of the pet's config, get enchanting cost, and we're going to pass through the pet as well as the player's profile.data. Then we'll create the variable can afford, and if the profile.data.gems is greater than or equal to the price, then the player can afford it. And if they're not able to afford it, then we want to stop the function right there. Now after we check if the player is able to afford it, and if they're off cooldown, we'll then set them to be on cooldown. So table.insert player cooldowns, and we want to insert that specific player. We then want to wait 5 seconds, and then we want to get the index of the player inside of that table. So table.find, we want to look through player cooldowns and find that specific player. And as long as we're able to find that player, then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to remove that index from the table. So removing the player from the cooldown table. And there we go. That handles all the cooldown logic. Next, what we're going to do is call adjust gems on the specific player. And we want to subtract the price from the amount of gems that the player currently has. Then we're going to go ahead and generate the enchantment. So choose enchantment and true because we want to get the enchantment. Then we'll create a variable called level. We'll once again call the choose enchantment function. And this time we'll say false because we want to get the level. Now that we've gotten the enchantment and the level, let's then add this information to the pet instance. So pet.enchantment equals, and then the table. And then we want to set the enchantment property equal to the enchantment and the level property equal to the level as well. Now that we've updated that pet, let's then communicate this to the client. So remotes.enchantPet, fire client. We want to fire that to the player, pass through the UUID, pass through the enchantment, and pass through the level as well. And that's all we have to do with this function. So now that we've created that function, we can then go ahead and actually hook this up to the networking. So enchant pet, and we want to call that function with the enchant pet remote event. Cool. So with all that being said, let's actually go back to our Pet Enchanting GUI. Inside of here, we're going to set the confirmation frame to not be visible. Going inside of the frame, inside of the auto frame, inside of the container, we have this template right here. Let's make that no longer visible. Inside of the chances frame, we have the enchantments, and let's make this template not visible, as well as for the levels, we have this template right here. Let's make that not visible. Going into the enchantment frame, let's make the enchantment not visible, and we'll do the same thing for the level frame inside of the level frame as well, just like that. And then finally, we'll set the enable property of Pet Enchanting to false. Now we also want to set the enable property of the Pet Enchantment GUI to false as well, so both of those are not able to be seen. Now, we've not scripted the Pet Enchantment GUI yet, but we will get to that. Let's go ahead and actually start this up and kind of test out our Pet Enchanting system. So hopping directly into our game, we can go ahead, walk over here, and now we can see that the Enchantment GUI pops up. And I should have actually set this frame to not be visible by default, but that's fine. We can click this button and make it visible or not visible. But now we can see all of our pets inside of here. We can also see our auto enchant. We can see all of the buttons have generated inside of here as well. And now if we click on any of these buttons, we can see the ones that are selected. We can then also select any of these pets that we want to. So let's just go ahead and select one of our cat pets and click on enchant. Do we want to enchant the cat pet for 1k gems? Yes, we do. And now we can see that the animation's going right there. We got rare luck. And what level did we get? We got level 3. And now since we have clicks 1 selected for auto enchant, this enchant process is going to keep going until we actually get that enchantment. If we select more, then it'll keep automatically enchanting the pet until we get any of these specific ones. So now we actually did just get clicks 2, and we can see that the enchant process has stopped because we received one of our selected enchantments. So that's all working great. Next, what we can begin doing is actually implementing the stat effects from enchanting your pets. So let's go back inside of the pets config, and inside of here, we want to actually update the get pet clicks function. Now below where we check the current upgrade and then do some math right there, we're going to create a variable called enchantment, which is going to be equal to pet.enchantment.enchantment. And now if that enchantment exists and that enchantment is equal to clicks, then we're going to increase the clicks variable. So we're going to say plus equals clicks multiply this number, and we want to multiply the clicks. And what we want to multiply the clicks by, I'm going to do something a little interesting here. So I'm going to say toNumber, and then I'm going to create a string. I'm going to say 0 dot, and then we're going to get the level of the pet enchantment. So for instance, if the pet enchantment is level 1, we're going to multiply clicks by 10%. Now if the player has a level 6 enchantment, then we're going to be multiplying the clicks by 60%. You of course can do your math and calculate the stuff however you want to. This is just one interesting way that I decided to go with, so feel free to make your own adjustments. Anyways, now we've handled that enchantment, we then have to handle all of the other enchantments which affect hatching specific rarities of pets. And now for us to be able to implement all the other enchantments, we actually have to add another function to this config. So we're going to go down all the way to the bottom of the script, and we're going to add a new function. This function is going to be called getActiveEnchantments, which is just going to accept the player's data. Then we're going to create a variable called equippedPets, which is going to be equal to pets.getEquippedPets, and we're going to pass through the player's data. We're then going to create a variable called enchantments, which is going to be just set to a blank table. We'll then loop through all of the equipped pets, and if the pet does have an enchantment, then we're going to insert the pet's enchantment table inside of the enchantments table. And finally, once we loop through all of the equipped pets, we're going to return that enchantments table. Now that we've added that function, we can then begin implementing the other enchantment by updating the eggs config module. So going into the replicate storage, inside of the configs folder, we have the eggs module script right here. Inside of here, we want to create a variable for the pets config, which is going to be equal to require.replicatestorage.configs.pets. Now that we have the pets config inside of here, we then want to update the get hash chance function. And below where we actually begin calculating the chance, what we're going to do is create a variable called enchantments, which is going to be equal to pets config.getActiveEnchantments, and then we want to pass through the player's data. Now we then want to create a variable for the pet's rarity, but before we do that, let's actually create a variable for the pet. So below the luck stat, we're going to say pet config equals, and then we're going to set the variable to that. Then now that we have that variable, we can say pet config.chance, and then easily get the chance. And for the rarity, we're going to say pet config.rarity. Then we actually want to loop through all of the enchantments, and using string.find, we want to actually look at the enchantment property and see if we're able to find the pet's rarity inside of that enchantment. So remember how all of our enchantments are named? We have rare luck, epic luck, and legendary luck. Well, if the pet's rarity is rare, then string.find is going to return true if one of the equipped pets has the rare luck enchantment. So if we are able to find that rarity inside of the enchantment, then what we're going to do is increase the chance by dividing the level in half. So for instance, if the enchantment level is 1, then the pet's chance will be increased by 0.5. But if the enchantment is level 6, then the chance will be increased by 3. And if, once again, you of course can balance your game however you want to. You might want to do the math a little bit differently, or you might want to reward it a little bit differently as well. Whatever works for you is definitely the best way to go. Next, what we begin doing is displaying the enchantment of a pet whenever we hover over them in any of our GUIs. Now, one of the easiest ways that I've found handling hovering over a GUI object is by actually using this module script published to the dev forum. Now, I'll leave a link down below in the description that'll take you to this page, and all you're going to want to do is just copy this code right here in the second code block of this post. This is the actual module script that you'll just copy and paste into your own game. So now that we've got that code copied, what we're then going to do is go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the libs folder, and we're going to add a brand new module script to this, and we're going to rename this module script to mouse over. Then we'll paste this code inside of the module script, and that's all that we actually have to do. We can then close out of that module script and even close the libs folder. And then what we're going to do is go inside of the client folder and open up the pet utils module script. Now inside of here, we actually need to get the run service. So we're going to create a variable for that. And then we also need to add the mouse over library that we just added inside of here as well. So mouse over, just like that. Along with the run service, we're also going to need to get the player service as well. So players and players. Then Then below all of our module variables, we'll create a variable called player, which is of course going to be equal to players.localPlayer. We'll then get the player GUI, which is going to be equal to player.player GUI. We're then going to get the pet enchantment GUI, which is going to be equal to player GUI, wait for child, pet enchantment, and then we're going to create a variable called frame for the frame inside of that GUI. So pet enchantment GUI.frame. And now that we've done that, we're also going to create a variable called hover button, which is going to be a text button, but it might not always be set. So we're going to set that equal to nil. Now what we're first going to do is actually go inside of the generate pet function. Towards the bottom, we're going to create a variable called enter, and we're going to say comma leave. And that's going to be set to the mouse over dot mouse enter leave event, and we're going to pass through the clone variables of there. Now we have our enter and our leave events. We're going to listen to the enter event, and we're going to connect that to an anonymous function. Now whenever the enter event is fired, that means that the player is hovering over that pet. So what we want to do is set the hover button equal to the clone, and then we can actually copy and paste this. And whenever the leave event is fired, we actually want to set the hover button to nil. Now we'll then create a function above the generate pet function called display enchantment, which is going to take two arguments. The first argument is going to be called display, which is going to be a boolean, and the second argument is going to be called UUID, which is going to be a string, as well as being optional. So we're going to add a question mark there. Now whenever we call this function, the first thing that we want to do is actually get the pet. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to go inside of the state manager, get the player's data, go inside of the pets table, and index the pets table with the UUID. Now if we are able to get the pet and the pet actually has an enchantment, then what we want to do is update the text of the title text label inside of a frame to a brand new string, which is going to display the enchantment that the pet currently has right beside the level of the enchantment as well. And then after we set the text, we then want to update the enabled property of the pet enchantment GUI to make it either enabled or not enabled. So we only want to make it enabled if the display argument is set to true and the pet actually exists, as well as the pet actually having an enchantment. So now that we've created that function, let's go back to the generate pet function. And after we set the hover button inside of the entered event, what we're then going to do is create a variable called GUI. And from this button, we want to look for the first ancestor, which is actually a screen GUI. Now, if the GUI that this button is inside of is enabled and the container that this button is held inside is also visible, then what we want to do is call display enchantment, pass through true, and then also pass through the UUID of the pet. Then go into the leave event. Whenever the player stops hovering over this button, we just want to stop displaying the GUI. So we're going to say display enchantment and pass through false to that. Cool. So now this function is displaying the enchantment, meaning it's making it visible or not visible, and it's updating the text, but then we also have to update the position of the frame as well. Now, in order to update the position of the frame, what we're going to do is go below our hover button variable. We're going to use the run service and listen to the stepped event, and we're going to connect that to an anonymous function. And then we want to check if there is a hovered button. And now this variable, it should actually be called hovered button, not hover button. So let's just go ahead and fix that real quick. There we go. So if there is a hovered button, then we want to get the player's mouse, which is going to be equal to player get mouse. And then we're going to set the position of the frame equal to a udim.from offset. And then we want to position it at the mouse's X and Y. Cool. So that's all that we have to do. And now no matter what GUI the player is currently looking in, as long as the generate pet function was used to create that pet inside of that GUI, whenever the player hovers over that pet, if the pet is enchanted, the enchantment will be displayed to the player. So let's go ahead and start up our game and test this out. Now, if you're receiving any errors when you're starting up your game, that's because we most likely have pets in our inventory that were not given the enchantment property. So what I'd recommend doing is opening up the data server script and changing the profile data store to something different. Now that we've done that, I'm also going to set the price to get the enchanting cost to 0 for right now, just so that we can test this out, enchant pets, and visibly see everything working. So going inside of our game, I'm going to go to the enchantment table, and I'm going to go ahead and enchant this bunny. Now, after enchanting the bunny, if we go into our pet inventory and hover over the pet inside of the pet inventory, we can see that the pet's enchantment is displayed right here. So with that being said, to do our final touches, I'm going to go back to the pet config script, and instead of returning 0 for the get enchanting cost, I'm going to go back to returning the price. And then additionally, going inside of the star GUI, going inside of the pet enchanting screen GUI, inside of the frame, we have the chances frame right here, and we want to make sure that that's set to not visible by default, as it should be. And with all that being said, we now have a working pet enchanting system in our game. And with all that being said, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, if you guys did enjoy or the video did help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on so you get notified every time I upload a brand new video. Of course, I have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this episode. There's a link down below the description, and you guys can go check that out. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.